Tonight, if you have a question about this past Sunday's sermon, or just a question in general, if you want to text me, I have my phone right here. I'm turning it off now. Putting it on vibrate. And towards the end, I'll try to take a few minutes and answer any questions that you might have. Okay? So that's what that is. So we've this idea of looking at ancient religions, how even the whole thought of God came about, and our gods as it goes. And one of the things, for those of you who've been coming, religion was basically created to do what?
Fill in the gaps.
Fill in the gaps. This is what religion does. It fills in the gaps. It fills in the parts and the things that we don't know. And religion itself, is that something God created, or is that something man created? Man, because there's lots of different religions, okay? And so religion is a word that we use to talk about organized religion. Belief systems, just general interest in anything is what we have with that. And so we taped last week, and we're going to be taping these each week and putting them on the website. So if you want to go back and watch last week and kind of catch up, you can do that. So we're gonna where we're going to start is we're going to put the nomadic groups with the percentages and all of that. Is where we ended last week, and ancient people groups. And when I'm talking about ancient, I'm talking about they're going back way back, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And one of the things that they put together these as best they could from what we have, the nomadic groups, or the groups that just moved around. They would just go wherever the resources were, and that of the religions, what they talked about, that 42% believed in an active high God. 22% believed in an inactive high God. And 36% believed in no high God. And I think that's pretty telling when you look at that, because you're looking at about 58% of the people of a nomadic group that did not believe in an active high God. And this is what I mean by an active high God. I personally believe in an active high God. I believe that there's only one God, and I believe that He is very active in the world today, that He's very active in my life, He's active in your life, He's active in everything that's going on. There's nothing happening in the world right now that surprises Him. There's nothing that He's not sure about. There's lots and lots of stuff that I don't understand. There's lots of mystery. All of those kind of things are on there, but I believe in an active high God. That's why I pray. That's why I worship. That's why I try to do the things that I do. Now, some people don't believe. They believe that there is a God, but maybe He's not so active. And maybe He doesn't really. It's kind of like the spin the top theory. Like He has spun the top, and it's just doing what it's doing. And then obviously there is I just don't believe in a high God at all. Another group of people was the people who were in slash and burn agriculture. And that's exactly what it was. It was slash and burn. They would go in and they may stay for a while. It's kind of like Vegas. People live there and stay for a couple of years and then move somewhere else, So it's kind of got that slash and burn kind of mentality. And this is what, the best that they can, this is what they came up. Believed in an active high God, 23%. In an inactive high God, 44%. No high God, 33%. So this is 77% of these cultures that did not believe in an active high God. That's a pretty high number, is it not?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next group of people is the dependence on gathering. So this is the early farmers. People would start they would build villages, and they would build towns, and they would build walls, and they would create schools, and they would create governments, and this is the beginning of civilization as we know it. An active high God, 16%. An inactive high God's 27%, no high God 57%. So this is 84% not believing in an active high God. Now the reason that I want to put that up there is because what we tend to do, especially if we're over, say, 50-ish, we always tend to want to think, if we could just go back to the good old days. If we could just go back to when everybody believed in God. And I just want to let you know, that day has never existed.
But they did sing hymns.
Well, Yes, those who believed in an active high God did sing hymns. And the hymns that we grew up with was for a very short period of time. That's for another conversation. So I just want to stretch your mind a little bit and your thinking a little bit, thinking that there's all of these cultures that have been going on, and the idea that there is one God and that He's in control and that He loves us and that He has plans for us and He expects us to live a certain way, and it's all the things that we teach and preach and sing about in church. This has never been a wide held belief. It just hasn't. It's always been a minority. And we need to realize that. Because if we're ever thinking it's going to go to that, it's not going to go to that. I mean, as much as I like football, and I love football, this weekend's a huge college football Saturday, and it's going to be another big NFL Saturday. There will be more people in the United States not watch football this weekend than do. Now, I don't understand that. That kind of bothers me a little bit, if I'm real honest. It bothers me a little bit. Like, what do you miss? You know what you're missing. But there's way more people that don't watch football than do. But it's easy to think that, that's what everybody does. And so we have to be careful when we come to this idea that we think that God, that there's always been this huge groundswell of following God and being with God and all of those things. And when we go to the Bible, the collection of the 66 books, and we go to the history of Israel, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, that represents the nation of Israel. So a remnant, there's always a remnant believed in an active high God. The rest of them were worshiping whatever God came along. Whoever whatever women they married or whoever they took in that God and became. That's what the whole Old Testament is about. That's what the whole idea of fighting against false gods and having all of these different things. That was Solomon's downfall. The wisest man to ever live. He married all of these women, and every time he married a woman from a foreign land, he allowed her to bring in her what? Her gods, her religion. And they built temples, and then we'll get to the temple stuff in just a minute. And this is how it developed, and this is what happened. So when we're moving into the point in time when we talk about the ancient history or the beginnings of religions of the stuff that was happening in the Old Testament when we read it. So this idea of an active high God, an inactive high God, and no high God. And what is the next slide that we have, Whitney? I'm not sure. Implications. Yeah. Okay, so here's some implications. Before we get to implications, this. What do you believe about God? And this is important because you may have your church answer. You may have the answer that you give when you're in a setting like this. You may even have the answer that you give when you're having a talk with your spouse or with a friend or a daughter or a son. But when it's nitty-gritty, just you, last 10%, what do you believe about God? This is an incredibly important question because it's going to direct every way that you live. And we've talked about in the past few weeks how some of us, what we need more than anything is hope. And we love hope. Some of us need help, and that's the thing that draws us to God. Some of us need answers. We're searching. We're questioning everything. What do I believe about God? See, what a lot of people in today's church, in today's Christian world, believe about God is this: they believe that God will bless me, but they don't believe that God will judge me. They believe in a loving God, but they don't believe in a judgmental God. They believe in a God that's going to forgive, but they don't believe in a God that holds people to consequences. So you have to decide, what God am I going to believe in? And so as we go through this process of looking through some different religions over the next few weeks, and then we'll get to talking about the Bible. And one of the phrases that I will use a lot, that we'll use in our conversation is this, is do you believe in the God of the Bible? Because that's a whole other question. Now, what's your belief about God? Do you believe in the Bible? Do you believe in the God of the Bible? So, just in the way that he did the surveys, do you believe in an active high God, an inactive high God, or no high God? I don't want anybody to answer, but just which one of those do you believe in? Do you believe in an active high God, an inactive high God, or no high God? Which one is it? And what are the implications of that? What are the implications if I believe in an active high God? What are the implications of that? I do want you to talk now. So what are the implications if you believe in an active high God? I can't hear you.
I include him in my everyday life.
Okay, you include him in your life. Okay?
He's in charge of everything.
He's in charge of
He
everything.
controls all.
Okay. What's the implications? Do what? I will behave myself. Okay?
Person of faith.
Personal faith.
Person of.
A person of faith is an implication. Okay? What's the implications if there is an active high God? I mean, everything, and nobody's been wrong yet.
We
What?
are not in control.
We're not in control.
Circumstances that come into our life are come through his hands.
Circumstances that come through our life come through his hands.
People are going to question our continued belief in him when things go wrong.
Say it again.
People will question our continued belief in him when things go wrong.
People will question our belief in him when things don't go the way that we want them to go. Yeah, this happens all the time. All the time.
He will judge me when I do wrong, and I know I'm doing wrong, and he will judge me.
He will judge me when I do wrong. This is a real implication.
Consequences.
There's consequences. This is implications. I have a role to play. I have things that I should be doing. I have things that I can't do. These are the implications of a high God. If you have a boss, what are the implications of you having a boss?
The same thing.
You got to obey. You got to show up for work. You got to do what's supposed to. You got to produce. You have to. You have to respect. You can't complain. I mean, there's all of these. There's all these implications if you've got a boss.
You do get paid though if you have a boss. You
do what?
You get paid though.
You do get paid,
We get blessed
and you get rewarded
from the Lord.
from the Lord and sometimes the boss.
That's our payment, John.
Right. So those are. What are the implications if there's if there is a God but he's inactive?
Fear. You don't know what he's doing.
Okay, you don't know what he's doing. Okay, so there's a lot of uncertainty,
Uncertain.
a lot of uncertainty, a lot of wishy-washy,
A
Well-
lot of acting out.
a lot of acting out. Okay, what's the implications if there is no high God?
It's a free for all.
It's a free-for-all.
What I say goes.
What I say goes.
How he controls.
Make your own rules.
You get to make your own rules.
No accountability.
No accountability.
Live for today.
Live for the day.
Watch the news.
Watch the news.
It's morally comfortable.
Whatever's morally comfortable.
Yeah, for party.
Party. Now, why were y'all able to answer that one so much easier?
Because that's the way the world is.
Because that we see that every day, don't we?
Right.
We see that modeled for us every day. We see everyday people living as if there is no high God. And the truth is, there are a lot of people who say they believe in a high God, but live like there is no high God. And that happens all the time. So again, I just want us to be thinking about and aware that there are implications to this, and it's been going on for a really long time. So here, let me ask you a couple of questions. It's a true or false question, okay? I'm going to ask it, and I'm going to let it sit for a second, and then I'll say, okay, somebody give me an answer. But and you kind of have to have been here for the past couple of weeks. Okay, if you haven't been here, then you don't know. Religion is about control. True or false?
Who's control?
It is about control.
Religion is about control. Based on the stuff that we've been studying and talking about in the past couple of weeks, religion is about control. True or false?
False.
Why would you say false?
Well, because people came up with religions because they didn't know what to do. Was to fill in the gaps.
It's to fill in the gaps. They see the white albino deer and like, what do I do? What do we do with this? So we create a deer shrine. Let me ask this way. Organized religion is about control. True or false?
True.
Okay, that one's true. Okay, the first one may be true as well, but I think there's a little bit of false in the first one, because religion in its truest form. And remember, if you were here last week and you go back and watch it, we put up the definition of religion, the one when nobody understood, and then I put up one that I kind of wrote out and talked about how, okay, this is what religion means to me. From that standpoint, religion is not about control. Religion is about faith. Religion is about a God who loves me. Religion is about a God who's in control more than I would ever be in control. So it's not about control from that standpoint. But organized religion becomes very much about control. And that's the next phase that we run into. And just as man developed and civilization developed, and some people began to be able to read and to write and building buildings. When you go back to the Old Testament, and you have the story of Adam and Eve, and then it's then there's the next really big thing is the flood, and then right after the flood is the Tower of Babel. And why did the Tower of Babel happen? They were trying to get to God, so it's not that they didn't believe in a God.
They were trying to be God.
They were trying to be like God. But why were they able to build a tower? I got this from Rob Bell. I think it's brilliant. Why were they able to build a tower?
They were working together.
Alicia, we could go out in this parking lot and we could work all day together and not build a tower.
You got to bring Scott.
He could tell us how to do it.
I can see how to decorate.
You know how to decorate, yeah. Do you know why they were able to build the Tower of Babel?
Control the people.
Same language.
No, they figured out how to make bricks. Because before there were bricks, you couldn't build a tower. So technology brought about the building of the Tower of Babel. And by the way, God scattered them, not because they were trying to build a tower to him, but because they were disobedient, because he told them to do something. He told them to scatter and to multiply the earth. And what did they do? They huddled. And so when they started building the tower, he affected their ability to communicate. So all the people who could communicate this way and all the people who could communicate this way and all, they, what?
Yeah.
So God had to come in and make them do what he wanted them to do, which is what he's doing with you as well. He's making you do what he wants you to do. And so the fact that they had brick and they had the ability to do that. So when man stopped being not so much slash and burn agriculture and not so much nomadic in their way of doing life, and when people started settling down and you started building things and you started building towns and villages and all of that kind of stuff, and obviously that really depends on what culture you're in and what part of the world you were in. But one of the primary things that they started doing is they started building temples. And so the next really big step in the study of religion is temple worship. Because there became a designated place for worship to take place. Temple worship. And when we go to the Old Testament, we see that, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But what the studies and the guys who do all of that stuff and study all that stuff, what we've learned is that the early movement in temple worship was toward monotheism or monotheism. I can never say that word. You know what that means? One God. Okay. So some of the stuff that we have for our early, even Egyptians, that they had one God. But as the temple was built, when they built the temple, and they would build a building, they would need resources for the building. And they would need people to take care of the building. And so you begin to have something that is called a priest. Church workers or pastors, the names have changed, but they began as priests. And so you would have priests who would begin to take care of the temple and take care of everything that was required to be in the temple. And so, since almost every one of the early religions had sacrifice, had blood sacrifice as a part of what they were doing, this became a very messy job. This became an expensive job, because when you were killing animals as a religious act of worship, what were they doing? What did it cost? How did they barter back then? Did they walk in and throw a 20 down on the table? They traded and bartered what? Animals. Yeah. If you were to go in, and so if you were going to have this big important religious festival, and you were going to have to sacrifice 30 prize bulls, we're talking cha-ching. We're talking lots and lots of money. And so what begins to develop is, well, how do we get the money that we need to have the festivals? How do we get money that we need to have the worship? How do we get money to pay for the priest? How do I get enough money in to make sure I keep my job? You see how this develops, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so if the money needs to come in, then just like any other business or any other thing is, you need to make sure the money's coming in. Okay, so you can't get in the way of the money coming in. Which is, that's not changed. That's still going on today in every aspect of life. So what happened, the priest would begin to say, we need money coming in, so we don't need a demanding religion. We need an easy religion. We need a religion people can relate to. So they introduce multiple gods. And the gods that are introduced through temple worship is it goes from monotheism to polytheism, to multiple gods. And one of the reasons that they needed multiple gods was this, is that people were more comfortable with human-like and less demanding gods of polytheism. Not so demanding. Don't really have to change much. Look, we've made this, if you look at the Egyptian gods, they've got legs and looks like a dog face, and it's something you can, it's what? It's relatable. It's relatable. And so this is how things begin to be introduced, and that people were more comfortable with that, then they were able to control it. And the temple priests were able to control anyone who was seeking a more demanding faith. So when people would come in and say, hey, this is a joke, there's no way this half-man, half-fox statue has got anything to do with the way that we're living, they would just kill him. Because what was he doing? He was stepping on the toes. He was getting in the cash flow problem. Okay? And so that's how the temple worship began. They started introducing all of these different kinds of gods, gods that were very relatable, gods that weren't very demanding. One of the primary gods in all of the ancient religions, especially when you go to the religions that are mentioned in the Old Testament, where a lot of them were centered around a 3-letter word that starts with S and ends in X. What would that be? Sex. Now, if you want to bring in a lot of money, make your religion about sex. And you're not ever going to have a cash flow problem. Now, do we have temples today?
Yes.
We obviously have religious temples. Do we have non-religious temples?
Yes.
It depends on how you define the word religious, doesn't it? We have a whole big long street called the strip. It's nothing but temples. And this kind of thing's been going on for an awful long time. And so the temple worship began that way. So when we get into this idea of temple worship, then we start coming into some things like what we have in the Old Testament. And you have the nation of Israel in Genesis being born out of the Exodus. So they're leaving Egypt, a place with lots of temple, a place with all kinds of things that are going on. And this nation of Israel, and Moses is called, and most of us know that story, and how Moses comes down, and they leave the Red Sea, or walk across the Red Sea, and then they go into the desert, and the first couple of days they get the 10 Commandments. Then they don't go into the Promised Land, and when they don't go in the Promised Land, and God says, okay, you're cursed to 40 years of wandering in the desert. Do you know one of the first, He gives them some more laws other than the 10 Commandments, and then what happens? Anybody know?
They wrote a whole bunch more.
Wait, if you go to the end of Exodus, so we got Genesis and Exodus. So Exodus is number what in books? Number 2. When you get towards the end of Exodus 36 through 40, do you know what's in there? It is not great devotional reading. It is long and it's boring. Because you know what it is?
Law.
It's God giving the nation of Israel incredibly detailed information on how to build a temple. Now, they didn't have a country yet, so it was a portable, mobile temple. And I don't know if we have any pictures. Do we have any pictures of the tabernacle?
Yeah, down at the bottom there's 2 different ones.
And if you have one of those, we used to have Bibles that had pictures in them. Anybody have Bibles with pictures in them? You know, they would have. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's a great picture of the early tabernacle when they were moving around and traveling around in the desert. And you see the altar, and then there's the inside the tent. There's we could do weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of study on the tabernacle and how it was put together and all the details and all of those kind of things, where the Ark of the Covenant was and all of that kind of stuff happened in there. But at the very beginning of the nation of Israel, even before they are a nation, what do they have?
A temple.
And who told them to do it?
God.
Who gave them the directions to do it?
God.
Right? I mean, this idea of temple worship is a God idea. And the fact that every culture and man has always built temples to a God, would seem to think that we would get that from Him. And that's part of it, something that's within us. That would be another picture of it. The rendition, obviously nobody has a real picture of it. But just based on what we have in the scriptures, you would have that. So you have that in the book of Exodus. And it's very, very detailed on what was given and the blood sacrifice that was given, which was once a year. So the Jews had it good. They didn't have to go to church every week. They just had to go once a year. And then they had like 5 other parties during the year. That was a pretty good system. I don't know why we changed it, frankly. And then we get King David. So they do get there, and then they start their country. Okay, now we have a country, and they asked for a king, and God gave them a king when He didn't want them to have a king, but they got a king, and then He messed all that up, and then He anointed David, so David becomes the king, and David is this fantastic fighter, and he's this guy, and this is what he does, and David wants to build a temple. So if we have First Chronicles 28. Can you put that on something that's not behind that picture? Can we go back to the beginning? The very beginning?
That's it.
Okay. So David's summoning up everybody, and he's getting all these people together, and then he goes so he starts talking about it was my desire to build a temple where the Ark of the Lord's covenant, God's footstool, could rest permanently. The Ark of the Covenant. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Yes. Indiana Jones? Y'all know that? Indiana, got that thing? All right. Next. I made the necessary prayers for building it, but God said to me, you must not build a temple to honor my name, for you're a warrior and have shed much blood. Now that's interesting, isn't it? That David wanted to build a temple. He desperately wanted to build a temple. And God said, you can't do it. Not because of Bathsheba. Because that's the first thing we're thinking, wasn't it? No. You can't do that because of Bathsheba. No. God didn't want David, who had shed much blood as a warrior, to build the temple. Why? I have no idea. But that's what he says. It says, you must not build the temple to honor my name. You're a warrior and have shed much blood. Yet the Lord, the God of Israel, has chosen me from among all the fathers' family to be king over Israel forever. We'll go to the next one. And from among my sons, the Lord has given me many. He has chosen Solomon to succeed me on the throne of Israel and to rule over the Lord's kingdom. And then he goes on, he says, this is your son Solomon will build my temple and its courtyards, for I have chosen him as my son, and I will be his father. And if he continues to obey my commands and regulations as he does now, I will make his kingdom last forever. So he keeps going. We'll go to the next one. David repeated himself a lot, and so that's one of the problems with the Old Testament. It's like, I just read that verse. And so he goes on and he talks about some different things. And we'll go to the next one. And so David also gave Solomon all the plans he had in mind for the courtyards of the Lord's temple, the outside rooms, the treasury, the rooms for the gifts dedicated to the Lord. The king also gave Solomon instructions concerning the work of the various divisions of priests and Levites in the temple of the Lord. So there's a plan here. There's a plan for the actual building. There's a plan for how it's going to work. There's a plan for the priest and the people and how it's going to work and what their jobs are and what their regulations are. And so all of this is going on. And this is not just going on for the nation of Israel, who's worshiping the one true Yahweh God. Every nation around them is doing this. Okay, every people group's doing this. They got their own temples with their own stuff and their own deals, the way that they're making it work. And we'll go to the next one. And he gave specific instructions, and he talked about the amount of gold and bronze and silver and all of that kind of stuff that was placed on it. And then it keeps going. Then he gave plans for the Lord's chariot. This was given to him. It keeps going. And he tells him to be strong and courageous and go out and do this. And then as you keep reading, it goes into very detailed accounts of the amount of gold and the amount of silver and the amount of this, and just one little section of the temple. I ran the numbers on it. It was over $4 million in today's money in gold-plated, forks. They spent a ton of money, elaborate things, in building this temple and putting it together. Now, is there a picture of the Solomon's temple, Whitney? That would be a general rendition of the temple that, go back, of Solomon's temple that was built and dedicated, and you go to the Old Testament and you dedicate it. In fact, there. How many public prayers do you think are in the Bible? prayers where a person is praying in public for everybody to hear? How many do you think? Give me a number.
5.
5? Hundreds?
Hundreds.
Hundreds? That's 1. And it was when Solomon. So Danny, but you went over, so no problem. It was when Solomon dedicated the. We have some prayers of other people that were private prayers, but the only public prayer was when Solomon dedicated the temple. And it was built between 966 and probably finished around 960. Now it was destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonians. Because when you were a conquering nation, when you would go in, where do you think one of the first places you would go? You would go to their temple. You would go to their what they say is their god. Because if you could wipe and level out their god, then that's a motivational killer. No pun intended. It was rebuilt by Herod, and this is the next picture. Herod rebuilt it in Jerusalem. It's one of the things that he was the most famous for. And this is the Herod that was in power when Jesus was born. And the temple was built around 20 BC. It didn't last very long because in 70 AD it was destroyed. And it was destroyed by the Romans when they came in and take Jerusalem. Now today when you see Orthodox Jews praying at the Wailing Wall, there's one wall that is left of the temple, and that's the closest that they're coming to when we do that. When they do that. So if there's ever a politician that gets it passed where they can rebuild that temple, you don't have to worry about the stock market because it's not going to be long. Because that's the temple that was built with the courtyards and all of the other things, and not very big, by the way. When we a lot of times when we think temple, we think Galleria Mall, or we think Caesar's Palace. It's not that at all. It would be a pretty small place that the temple stuff that was happening and going on.
When was the mosque built?
The mosque, I have no idea.
Because it's on that same property, correct?
It's on the temple. It's on the not the Temple Mount. It's the Dome of the Rock. Supposedly where Abraham offered up Isaac, which is it's very near. Yeah, it's like 100 yards away.
Oh.
Yeah. But maybe we'll get that when we get to Islam, but I'm not real sure about that. Okay, so here's what I want to wrap up. So all of these different religions, all these different reasons, fill in the gap, da-da-da-da. Hey, maybe there's just one God. Hey, let's build a temple to the one God. Oh, everybody doesn't really like this demanding God, and we got to live this certain way, and da-da-da. And then there's stuff that happens like this flood. If this flood comes and everything's wiped out, well, then this God doesn't love us. We don't like this God. Let's make another God. And so this is the kind of stuff that's happening. This is happening over and over and over and over and over. And then you start building temples, and every one of them has the different things that they're doing and why they're doing it. And the temple worship brings in multiple gods. So by the time you get Abraham on the scene, when Abraham comes on the scene, and he is saying that there's only one God, it's a foreign concept. Because the idea of one God, like no, that can't be. And he's an invisible God, and there's no image, there's nothing that we can look at. You can see how that's easily turned down, and he's incredibly demanding. Have you heard those 10 Commandments? Come on, please. You can't do those 10 things. And so that's where it would come. So here's what we're going to do. Next week we're going to start by looking at some of the one of the 5 major religions, and we're going to start with Eastern religions, with Hinduism. And next week I'm going to have a little bit of help, and Tom's not here tonight. Tom's going to help me. We recently baptized Tom, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his story and how he's come from. But the reason I'm going to have Tom share with us a little bit next week, kind of an interview style, is he heavily pursued Eastern religions. He came out of a Catholic background, heavily pursued Eastern religions for a long time and then has ended back up, like we started tonight singing about Jesus, and he ended back up with Jesus makes the most sense and is the most fulfilling. And so we're going to talk a little bit about his journey, and along the way we're going to learn a little bit about primarily Hinduism. And the 5 major religions, to simplify it Marty style, is there's humanism, and the reason I put humanism number 1, it's based on the percentage of the nomadic people and the slash and burn people. How long has humanism been around? Forever. Okay. Cain had a really good grasp on that one. Okay. So it started really, really early. So you have humanism, then Judaism, which would be the Jewish faith that started with Abraham. And out of Judaism comes Christianity. And then there's Islam, which comes out of
Abraham.
Judaism. Okay. And then you have Hinduism. And there's all kinds of things that you can put under Hinduism, from Buddhist to all kinds of other things that we'll talk about. So we're going to spend some time talking about Hinduism. And then we're going to spend some time talking about Islam, kind of a current topic. Of where that's coming from. Then we'll spend a little bit of time on Judaism, and then we'll get to Christianity, and then we'll go into the Bible, and then where the Bible came from and some things like that. But here's a couple of things before we go. See what y'all know. No, back up for me. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Those 3 in the middle. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They have several things in common. Do you know what they are? There's monotheism. Very good. Who said that? Oh, way to go, Liam. They're all monotheistic. They all believe in one God. What else do they have in common? Abraham. They all go back to Abraham. And Christy's talking about the Dome of the Rock, because the Jews believe that Abraham took Isaac there. The Muslims believe that he took Ishmael there. Okay? And so it's one God, Abraham. There's something else that all 3 have in common.
They have Muhammad and we have Jesus. Is that the only big prophet?
Right, but that would leave the Jews out. All 3. Something all 3 have in common. What?
Like the Bible.
No, somebody said a better word first. Scriptures. Those 3 have holy scriptures. Humanism does not, obviously, and Hinduism does not, and all other world religions do not have that. At some point down the road, and I'm going to get some help, we are going to tackle Mormonism, because that's a whole nother thingy that we have to deal with. But Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all one God, all relate back to Abraham, and all have a holy book. Now, the Jews' holy book is what? Primarily the Torah, the first 5 books, but they'll also they'll put up with the rest of the Old Testament. Christianity's holy scripture is what? The Bible, which makes of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And Islam's holy book is Quran. Okay. And so those have that kind of stuff in common. So what I just as a pet peeve, one of the things I hope that we'll get right and that we'll change our language. Is Presbyterian a religion? No. Thank you. Is Baptist a religion? No. Is Methodist a religion? No. Is Catholicism a religion?
Yes.
No. It's Christianity, and under Christianity you have Catholicism, and then you have Protestants. You have everybody else. And we'll get to all that, and we'll talk about some of that stuff as we go. And this stuff I think it's incredibly important that we know, because we need to know how to talk to people. We need to know how to talk to our kids. We need to know how to talk to our grandkids. We need to know what we're talking about. And so we got a lot of work to do. So next week we're going to start with Hinduism, and look at that and spend a week on that. And then obviously those other ones we're going to spend a lot more time on as we go. All right? Let me say a prayer, and only went 5 minutes over, so we did pretty good. All right, so let's pray. Father, I thank you for everybody that's here tonight. I thank you for their families. I thank you for the things that's going on in their life, the good and the bad. And Father, may you give us the ability to release the things that we need to release to you. Our worries, our concerns, our problems, our doubts. And Father, at the same time, may we be willing to accept what you have for us. At the top of that being your love and your mercy. Father, we want to believe in you as an active and holy and loving and just God. Help us to do the right things. Help us to pursue you in the way that you want to be pursued. Father, give us a hunger to know the truth, to be able to defend the truth, and to be able to speak the truth in a way that doesn't alienate other people, but doesn't offend other people, but helps people enter into a conversation. Because ultimately we want your will to be done. And we want to believe along with you that it is your desire in your heart that every man and every woman and every child that's alive on the planet repent and turn to you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for coming, guys. Hope you all have a super, super week, rest of the week.
Okay.